The aftermath of this type of trauma, and that's really what it is a trauma, is that it generates this looming sense of fear of losing the connection with the one you really love the most. And you want dad to kind of be the hero of your life. And so this sense of having to do life on your own, kind of fend for yourself. And so it's really about abandonment, but it's also about adult children of absent fathers, as you mentioned, because we focus on kids and all the things dad can do with them. And yet the real impact of that is often felt when we are adults. And we all have stories of trauma to some extent, some a lot, some very few, may not even know about what the stories are. And also, then those things are typically passed on for generations to come.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss-McDonald, founder, CEO of Paper Raven Books, and I have with us today a super special guest whose book we are promoting to get a wider audience because the topic is so important, especially for people who have had fathers in their lives. And the title of the book is The Legacy of Absence: Resolving the Wounds from Uninvolved Fathers and Individuals, Families, and Societies. And this author is an expert in this area. He's obviously an author, an educator, a business owner, a life coach. He has studied the impacts of an absent father on an adult child. He has worked with the National Fathering Ministry in Minnesota and Ukraine, sort of pre the most recent Russia-Ukraine conflict, and so has seen a lot of parent-child, father-child, adult-children relationships over a long period of time. So Mr. Tim Olson, I am so excited that you are here. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Morgan. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this. When you mentioned absence, or for those of us who have had fathers involved, and maybe even more so for those who haven't had fathers involved. But the true fact is we have all had a father at some time, either current or past. And to start, let me just mention that father who is working too much regularly or into some other kind of addiction, I call that an addiction too, but it might be sports, it could be TV, hobbies, drugs or alcohol, things that we would normally call addictions. He's basically choosing those things over his children. And of course, kids are not dummies. They know he's choosing those things over them, and that's called abandonment. And you'd be surprised at how many dads coach their kids, whether it be football or baseball or soccer or whatever sport, with the idea of spending time with their kids. But if you ask their kids, and we've done this time and again, they see it as dad spending time with the kids, not with them. That's disconnect there that we don't often notice that. What they're really looking for, the kids, is one-to-one time with dad, not with the whole team. Now, abandonment is, as I mentioned, it is abandonment, but that's really a feeling of being disconnected, even rejected. And the aftermath of this type of trauma, and that's really what it is a trauma, is that it generates this looming sense of fear of losing the connection with the one you really love the most. And you want dad to kind of be the hero of your life. And so this sense of having to do life on your own, kind of fend for yourself. And so it's really about abandonment, but it's also about adult children of absent fathers, as you mentioned, because we focus on kids and all the things dad can do with them. And yet the real impact of that is often felt when we are adults. And we all have stories of trauma to some extent, some a lot, some very few, may not even know about what the stories are. And also, then those things are typically passed on for generations to come.
I think that is one of the unique and perhaps most helpful aspects of your book, is that it would be very easy to focus on the young child, and trying to speak to the father who maybe wants to be a better dad, and here's how you can be a better dad for your young child. But there's a much bigger and probably wider problem among those of us who are adults now and maybe didn't have a great relationship with our fathers, and maybe our fathers aren't even around anymore. And how can we, start to heal some of those wounds? And your book title even speaks to it, not only as an individual, but, when we're still a member of our own family or a society, how do you approach your work with an adult who's grown and maybe can't even, actually talk to their father anymore to start to heal those wounds?
Well, I think it's the fifth chapter of my book. I spend that chapter talking mostly about statistics and how things in our lives get impacted by this. So you're right in bringing up the question about us as adults, and how do we address this? Because typically, an uninvolved father results in poor education for his kids and their kids, poor health treatment, less financial security. And there are many more things like that again, go on for the kids and the adults for generations. And so we really need to spend time with that. And as far as solutions, the most simple way to say it is that the solution to being uninvolved is being involved. And that might sound really simplistic, but it's a true thing. Think about all the people that you know and that are good friends, and the reason that they're good friends. And typically it's because you spend time with them. You get to know them. You know who their friends are. You know what their interests are. And the more you do that, the more you become friends with them. And it is exactly the same for fathers and their kids. Fathers tend to know very little about their kids. They're at work maybe all day, so they don't see them. And then they come home and the kids are at sports, and the fathers, they want to eat supper and sit down and watch TV or whatever. And so they don't get engaged in their lives. And so the best solution is just to get involved. Now, a lot of fathers say, well, I don't even know what to do. And it's interesting with some of the father groups, we talk about ways to be involved. And in their minds, the only thing that comes up because of their experience is that they are there to provide. That's all they do is provide for their kids. And so we try to help them see other ways that they contribute to their kids besides provision. And one of them is primarily the mother's job, historically and culturally and so on, is nurture. But the fathers can also nurture, and they can bring comfort and discipline, finance, achievement, protection, trust, security, encouragement, education, health. All of these things are significant, but also the dad brings mentoring. Now, my dad was a great dad. Everybody loved him, but he was more this great man that everybody knew. And he wasn't really engaged in my life as father and son. He was in the trades, and he was very good at all the things he did in the trades. And so I would look to him and say, I wish I could learn all these different things, but I kind of expected that would come from, he was the leader. And so I often didn't ask for it, but at the same time, I did not get how to do things. I wanted him to be my mentor, to come alongside me, to show me how to do things. That's one of the practical things we can do as fathers. And modeling is so significant. Both sons and daughters find out how to relate to their opposite sex by watching how their father treats their mother. And if the father isn't around, they don't see this. Daughters don't see how to relate to men, or what to expect from men, or what they want to get from a man, unless they can see it primarily through their father or a strong male image. That's also a good possibility, because a lot of men just are not available. And so a lot of mothers ask me, my husband isn't there. He died, or we've been divorced for years, or he picked up and left, or he's in prison, or who knows what the reason might be. And so they just want to know, how can my kids get that influence? And so one of my solutions that I suggest is to find good men who are trustworthy, who are quality masculine men. In the book I have that, what is true masculinity, not what we see in the media or culture's definition of masculine men, the tall, silent, strong guy, but what true masculinity really is all about. And so that's what I suggest, is finding somebody that they can relate to, that they might know, And unfortunately, we see things like in scouting or in church and so on, where those in leadership take unfair advantage of kids. So it takes being very careful, because at the same time, it might be a good uncle or grandfather is very often the case. Grandfathers are so significant and they take the place of the dad often. And it could be an older brother sometimes. But looking around, I've heard stories from people where it's been a neighbor, a trusted neighbor who's been a great friend. And he's been somewhat of that mentor and that role model for them. So don't just say we don't have the dad, so we're out. Be creative and find other men around. There's another thing that fathers contribute, and that is to help both sons and daughters find their identity. And we've done a lot of research and a lot of observation and so on into this idea. First of all, what identity really means. And I believe there are 4 things included in identity. And one is to help our children find a sense of self-esteem. Another is confidence. And another one is maturity. And the 4th one is sense of self-worth, but also of self-esteem. A sense of self-esteem and a sense of self-worth are added to those. So those 4 things. Now, what's interesting is if we don't get an answer to those things in our lives, we will look for them. And this is true for everybody. We will look for them the rest of our lives, unless there's some kind of intervention in our life that introduces it to us. For me, it happened when we went to a certain church after we moved. And there's a small church, a really good one, a very solid church. And there were a group of men there, young fathers. So most of them were just a few years older than I was. And they were really good fathers. And they were great examples to me. They were models to me. And I learned so much from them.
Like highlight that, Tim. I mean, you've just given us maybe a different perspective. Like, I'm just thinking about as someone who's now an adult and I have my own kids and thinking about, well, if my father wasn't the father that maybe I needed, like you just said, your dad wasn't the mentor that you had hoped, you turned to your peers, your friends, and you saw how they were fathering and were self-aware enough to say, oh, they're maybe fathering differently than I would have considered or anticipated. Do you remember that moment, Tim? Like, how did you come to know that there was a legacy of absent fatherhood happening in your own life?
Well, for one thing, a lot of that understanding came when I was in my 8th career as a personal and business life coach, because I was talking about this subject a lot. And a lot of my clients, I was a personal and business life coach. And so a lot of my clients were business owners, and particularly family businesses. And more often than not, as we discussed the issues that were going on in their lives, what I realized was what was getting in the way was their relationship with either their sons and daughters, who were maybe in the business or not, or their own fathers. And so we started to deal with that. We'd say, well, if this is such an issue, let's take a look at that. And as we did, almost inevitably, the business issues took care of themselves. And that's a phenomenon that's seen in business too, without talking as I do from my approach, where they see it primarily with the family. And I've taken this one step farther and say, well, let's look beyond just the family. Let's focus on the father, because that seems to be the linchpin here the most. And so it got to be where my first question to all my clients, whether it was business or not, tell me about your relationship with your father when you were growing up. And when they described that, first of all, it was shock of, wait a minute, what does that have to do with my business? And I would say, well, just humor me. And so they'd start to talk. And it wasn't very long before, even for many of them, the tears would start coming, because they realized how significant the relationship with their father had on their lives as adults. And it is very significant. It affects us in all these ways. Now, there's another thought in terms of what to do as a father with your kids, because the father's role is primarily during the first 18 years of life. And the goal is to prepare them, sons and daughters, to leave the nest and to fly on their own to meet the world all by themselves. And so if you think about that, about all the things they're going to meet as they do that, it gives you all these ideas of what to talk about and what to focus on as a dad. It's kind of making your own curriculum for life. How can I teach these kids? And they all go through that time period of the dad is the hero when they're 5 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. Then they start to lose that relationship. And dad seems to be it turns into this bumbling guy that they don't seem to have trust for anymore, and they lose the relationship and so on. But again, staying involved will help ease through that transition point. And so they can come out on the other end where they really do listen to their kids. Now, let me give you a little bit of a story, if you don't mind here. When my kids, when each of them turned about the age of 20, I took them one at a time to a restaurant. I have 2 boys and a girl. So it'd just be me and one of my sons or one of my daughters. And the first thing I said to them was, I think we've had a really good family growing up, a good experience. And it was definitely different than what I had experienced growing up, because I was very involved in our kids' lives. But I said, there are times when I think I really hurt you and wounded you, and I didn't even know it. And obviously, I would never do anything like that on purpose. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, would you please forgive me for those times? And when I asked it, I could see in their eyes and their minds that they were kind of reviewing some of those things and thinking of what they might be. But the fact that I asked for forgiveness and they said yes, thankfully, it takes away the power of that conflict, of that disagreement that we had at one time. And it draws us back together again. And that's part of the whole idea of resolving the wounds, is that it helps us to reconcile. It helps us to be on the same page with each other. And then another thing I said to them is, from now on, you are no longer my son or my daughter. And I am no longer your father, your parent. From now on, you are only my son or my daughter, and I am only your father. Now, that might be just terminology, but I believe it has a lot of significance in those words. And I think it changes. In fact, I think if we had that attitude right from the beginning, when the kids were born, it would change how we relate to them. Because we have to be the parent, but often we use the parent in more of a lording over and being in charge instead of kind of doing life together. Believe me, we never give up that role of, there's still that hierarchy there of being the parent. And so I don't want to say that that isn't, because I've seen too many parents, way too many parents who say, well, I don't want to discipline them. I don't want to anger them. I don't want to, control them. They need to be their own person. And that's not what I'm talking about at all, believe me. But as adults, this is really especially a significant thing. And I said, what I would really like is the privilege to still be able to speak into your lives. And whatever you might say or bring to me as a topic, and me to you, it's not that I want you to do what I say. It's I just want you to take my ideas and my thoughts and put them into your hopper of thinking. And then you decide. So that you're considering all the different things. So that role again of mentor and of modeling enters into that dynamic. And then I said to them, no matter what you decide, whether I agree with it or not, I will support you in it, because I think that's my role. I'll let you know if I don't agree with it, I'll tell you why, and so on. But nonetheless, you're my son or my daughter, and I will still encourage you, and I'll still support you and help show you the error of your ways. No, I will still be in this as a team with you. And so what I can tell you is that my kids are all grown up now. All three of them are in their 50s, and they have their kids. In fact, kids of kids. I have 5 great grandkids now, and they have over the years always come to me with their issues with their spouses, with their kids, with their jobs, in all areas, things that blow me away that they would, I mean, you don't see this in a lot of families where the kids can go to their father about those kinds of topics. And vice versa. I try to go to them with things that are happening in my life as well. And so that's an example of staying involved and an example of how you can relate. And forgiveness is a significant part of that. And so all of these steps are included in my book. And the goal, my personal goal with the book, is for reconciliation between fathers and their children, or between children and their fathers. In fact, it's most easy for children to approach their fathers with this. If you leave it up to the father, it's that much more difficult for them to come to this position of approaching their children and ask for forgiveness. It's easier for the kids to go to their fathers, but it can happen either way. And so those, I think, are some very practical things.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful, Tim. And I'm grateful that you opened up into like your actual conversations with your kids. I mean, I could almost like hear, myself, and I imagine anyone else who's with us, listening, watching, and imagining like sitting down with a 20-year-old who many of us would say, they're still a kid.
That's right.
And offering a change in the dynamic of the relationship and being the one to initiate that and to say, I see you now as my son, as my daughter, and I am now here as your mentor, not as the authoritarian parent. And like how many of us would sort of knee-jerk say, they're not ready yet. But to give them that space is, I'm sure, was tremendous for them and open the door for the next 35 years of involvement, right? Because it does seem like we often fumble around that like late teenage, early 20 phase where maybe we had an okay-ish relationship when they were young, but it got more and more complicated. And maybe it's us as the parents who has to say, I'm giving you space to be an adult. And even if I don't agree with you, I support and encourage you. And so thank you for bringing us into that conversation. If you're here and you're watching and listening and you're thinking, I want this kind of conversation in my life, I want to know more about how I can support my own children or how I might be able to approach my, father or father figure to maybe repair and reconcile my father or father figure. The good news is Tim has a book. So you can actually discover more about this. And that book, as I said, we are pushing out with a special promotion right now. So you can go to paperravenbooks.com/the-legacy-of-absence. That's all one word. There's a link next to this video. You can just click that link. It'll take you on over to Amazon. The book is for sale in all the versions, and the ebook is on promotion right now. So you can go ahead and click on that ebook, grab it, load it up in your Kindle, read it this weekend when you've got a little bit of time. But go ahead and do that now while you're here and while you're thinking about it. If you have someone in your life who you feel like maybe might resonate with this message, tag them, share this with them, send it to them, because they can get that special promotion ebook right now as well at paperravenbooks.com/the-legacy-of-absence, all one word. So Tim, I mean, you have just this wealth of, you kind of alluded to it, studies and research and work with not only individual clients, but actually groups and things. And a big part of this book, well, I mean, a big part of the book is practical, but there are also some stories that you give to us. And some of those stories are from your work with the National Fathering Ministry in Minnesota and Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit about what that work has looked like and what you've learned there?
Well, first of all, when I started working with fathers, I had had a lot of experience as a dad and as a school teacher and as a school principal and so on. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on that. But the more I got involved, the executive director of the National Fathering Ministry was one of my first clients as a life coach. And so I worked with them and learned more and more. It kind of blew me away how much I was learning, and eventually became one of their presenters. And then they started a ministry, a similar one as Minnesota, in Ukraine back in the early 2000s, and hired a Ukrainian man as the executive director over there in 2003. And so I went over there about 12 times to be a part of that and set it up. and worked with them, taught them how to have their own board of directors for him as an executive director. We took them all the materials that we had. We have 10 core lessons in our material here that we use in businesses, and we use them in churches, hospitals, almost any setting. And we took them over there and used them there the same way, and gave them the essence of what they needed to be able to teach. And so they developed this whole program over there where they were able to have volunteers in each of the oblasts, which would be like counties here. Ukraine is just a little bit smaller than the size of Texas. And so it's not a huge country. In fact, although it is the largest country in Europe, it's larger than France and so on. So it's a big country that way. But they have volunteers. And one of the things that we encourage them to do, that we do here, was a Father's Day, and have Father's Day events. And so they started to do these. The executive director is very, very creative and very good with people, and was able to have these events and bring in journalists from radio and TV and magazines and newspapers, and they would cover it really well. And in about 2007 or so, our organization introduced a bill to their government to start an official National Father's Day. Well, first of all, they said that we don't want to have just another excuse for men to get drunk. And they resisted. And finally, I think it was about 2019, give or take, I can't remember exactly, the outgoing president at the time signed that bill into law. And we have heard from many sources that the organization that was begun through ours over there has had an impact on the entire nation.
Wow.
By that law and by their influence in many other ways. It's been a very exciting thing to see happen. And we have, of course, get invitations to do this all over the world, but we have extremely limited personnel and staff and so on, so it's been difficult. But one of the things, when you compare first world countries and a lot of second world countries, according to international census figures, the United States is the most fatherless nation in the world. And that's based on fathers not being present in the home. And Ukraine, I explained very clearly in the book how Ukraine became a fatherless nation because of socialism and communism in particular. And I talk about Karl Marx and several others who were a part of that movement. And they knew that if they take the father out of the home, they can control the whole nation. That was their main tenet. And that's what we see that's growing more and more in the United States. So the family as a unit in the United States is becoming less and less of a popular thing. There are many more, increasingly more women who are single as mothers, who, I'm not saying for or against, I'm just showing the trends, that are wanting to raise a family without even having a father in the first place. I mean, there's a father that somehow procreates, but then their intention is to be a single parent right from the word go. And so there are many other ways too with what's happening with genders and so on. And again, not speaking for or against any of that, but it's just showing there's a change away, taking fathers out of the family unit. That's a growing trend.
And I think you're hitting at one of the main thrusts of the book, and why even in the very subtitle of the book, it addresses the resolving the wounds from the uninvolved father in individuals and family and society, because we can really look at kind of all of those levels. We can look at it from an individual perspective, me with my kids and me with my father.
Mm-hmm.
We can look at it from a family perspective. What are we doing sort of intergenerationally that maybe we hadn't realized? And then what are we doing at a societal level? Yes, we want to give people agency to choose how they want to do life. You know, that's part of the tenets of being American, right? Is
Yes.
freedom. And we always want to be intentional about our choices. And I mean, you said it even from the very beginning, even if you don't have a biological father in the picture, can you have a supportive, encouraging, mentoring uncle, neighbor, grandfather, someone who can provide that modeling of the masculine and the feminine? And not to say that there our biological tenants. I mean, there are some, but just this way of being and interacting and the dynamics between people without the inclusion of the father's perspective, we're missing a piece of that human relationship. And it's perhaps more far reaching than we realize or want to admit.
Right. I first wrote the book as a business book because of what I described earlier. But my editor at the time, which did a phenomenal job, suggested that that could be a next book and that the book right now needs to be for a more general audience. But in the process of it, one of the things I talk about is anger. And anger management is a common thing in businesses today, and there's a big need for it. But our ministry, address the source of anger rather than anger itself. And so if we can address that and solve the source of the anger, it's much better than managing anger, but there's still a need for managing. So that's one of the things that's more unique about my book that are in most books of this type. There are a lot of books being written about the same issues that I'm talking about, which is a good thing. But those are four things there are four things rather, and one of them is anger, or the source of anger. The other is identity, as I mentioned before, the four unique things in identity. And a second one, or third one rather, is transference. And I have a definition of transference. Transference is our response of anger toward a person or event in the present that triggers an unrelated experience in our past that caused pain. And if we can look at our work settings and see when people are, let's say, their behavior is demonstrating some things that aren't appropriate. It might be anger, it might be feeling like they were passed by for advancements. I do a seminar where I list all the different things that are involved here that enter into the work setting. So we're not even talking about the family, but the same things happen there in the work setting. And if we can recognize what they are, we can approach them often in the same way. I give a story about a fellow who has a great relationship with another person there, but for suddenly just out of the clear blue, he erupts with anger over something he would normally never do. And there was something about it at that time that triggered this transference. It's a response of anger toward a person or event in the present. He addressed that person who really had nothing to do with it, but it triggered an unrelated experience in the past that caused pain. And so I just want to bring up the significance of the work setting and how business figures into this whole family relationship just the same.
Wow. Wow. So folks, if you're here and you're like, I think Tim is speaking to me. The good news is, as we said, the book is on promotion right now. You can grab the ebook, go to paperhavenbooks.com/The Legacy of Absence, all one word, or you can click the link right next to this video. It'll take you over to Amazon. You can download that book onto your Kindle right now for this weekend. It's available in physical versions as well if you prefer. If you know someone who might resonate with these ideas, please send this to them, tag them, share it with them. We definitely encourage you to do that. One more question for you, Tim. Looking back on everything that you've done now with the book and really with your research and your coaching and your ministry, and it's all coming to fruition in the book and getting this message out to wider and wider audiences. Is there anything that you have learned that you would share with maybe a younger version of Tim, maybe some words of encouragement or words of wisdom?
Well, I think that the things that I have learned, if somebody could have presented those to me more when I was young, it would have been great. That goes all the way back to childhood, to have a relationship that was involved. For my dad to have that involved relationship with me would have made a huge difference. One of the things I struggled with all my life was a sense of confidence, because I didn't get that from my dad. And so I've tried to tell that to my kids. You can have confidence knowing who you are and to be that person. And in my coaching, I've always tried to do that, help people understand who they were made to be, and then to walk with them to become that person. And confidence is so important in that area, and self-esteem, and again, maturity and identity. Identity is about knowing that we are accepted. Hearing my father say, "You are mine, you are my son, and I love you." That's the essence of identity. I wish that could have been shared with me for my kids. I did that a lot. I always told my kids that I loved them very much. But hearing that, I knew my folks loved me, but I didn't hear that very much. And so if there's something that I could have heard more of, that would be something, and something I think we can tell each other. Tell those around you that you love them.
Yeah, sometimes it's as simple and as difficult as that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tim. I hope that this has brought a new sense of awareness and acceptance from anyone who's hanging out with us now and listening and watching. And I hope that you go and get a copy of Tim's book, The Legacy of Absence, Resolving the Wounds from the Uninvolved Father in Individuals, Family, and Society. You can grab a copy right now. Go to paperravenbooks.com/The Legacy of Absence, all one word. And we would love for you to go ahead and get a copy of the book, load it on your Kindle, tell a friend or a family member about the opportunity to get this book. It will be life-changing. So thank you, Tim, for writing this book. Thank you for being with us here today.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
All right, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.